Now, people can argue about, oh, who enjoys more here, who enjoys more there, who benefits more here and there. But at the end of the day, if the other party, and by other party, I'm referring to one of the original two people that got into the relationship together, if the other party is not comfortable with the poly situation, then
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who likes his woman the same exact way he likes his yogurt. He's a man whose new cardio routine includes jumping to conclusions. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. I am back with part 2 of a story that I honestly feel rocked people's December 2024 and January 2025 in a way that guys just did not expect. Honestly, I think the whole Sophia and Bumpy story was probably the most viral story, or at least the most viral podcast episode we've had in this country in a minute, or if ever, to be quite honest. Like, I've never seen so many Kenyans talk about one episode to that degree and with that level of virality, even beyond like guys who are like super into Game of Thrones and shit like that. Even the World Cup, I don't think people discussed it as much as they discussed this particular Sophia and Bumpy episode from So This Is Love. So considering that I did do the first 40 minutes of that podcast episode and I sort of broke that bit down, it's only right that I finish off the rest of it because there are more points to be brought out. There's definitely more to come. And I did say that I was going to finish it off. And honestly, there's so much that you can learn and pick up from, even from the rest of the hour 50 to 2 hours that the episode ran after the 40 minutes that I discussed. And that's what this episode is supposed to be for. But before I can get into that fully, first off, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you listen all the way till the end, and I hope you do at least pick something from it, whether it's entertainment, whether it's, learning something, whether it's, even just a good pastime. Like, I hope you actually do get something from this episode. And if you do want to give your thoughts, comments, and feedback, there's usually the comment section on whichever app that you're using to listen to this podcast, if it has it. But all in all, you can reach me through social media at the Breaktime_podcast on IG, at the Breaktime Podcast on Facebook, and on X. You can find me on at Bagaka the D, and the DMs are always open. So, you can always reach out. Now, with that said, before I can get to the rest of the Sophia and Bumpy story, I first want to bring forth a study that I recently saw, and it's on relationships, or more so the lack thereof. Now, apparently, according to a very recent study, 1 in every 4 adults will stay single for life. Now, as the story says, and I'll just read the very short bit. So, a study by the Pew Research Center highlights a significant cultural shift, revealing that 1 in 4 adults is projected to remain single throughout their lives. By age 50, a quarter of today's young adults may never have married. While this trend raises questions about its broader societal impact, research shows that single individuals often experience greater self-determination and personal growth compared to their married peers. End quote. Now, when I look at the whole story of, 1 in every 4 adults will stay single for life, okay, I feel like it's more shock value or more clickbaity, if I can call it that, as a title than it actually is real. Like, I was so ready to talk about, like singlehood, blah, blah, blah. Now, there are people that are very content with being single and not being with anyone. And if you're one of those people, good for you. Do I think that that's how everyone should be or everyone can be like that? No. I do believe that as human beings, we are social beings. And if anything, we should embrace the idea of society and community and having good quality relationships, even romantic ones. And that's actually particularly important for a lot of people. Now, with all of that said, I don't think that everyone needs to get married. Like, I know this is a bit of an unpopular take, but I don't think everyone needs to get married. I feel like marriage can sometimes hurt people more than it can help them. Although in terms of, like, for example, raising children, being in a solid institution where you have both parents present and available is the most optimal thing that you can have. So, it does kind of carry its perks there quite a bit. Also, there's a certain level of fulfillment. Married men tend to be happier than single men. You can go on and on about the benefits of marriage, but also what a lot of people have noticed is relationship quality can actually diminish after people get married, mostly because people aren't trying to date each other after they get married. And I'm not married, so I can't entirely say whether it's true or false, but some people usually talk about how it's better to just remain as long-term partners and not get married than to get married, of which if it works for you, fine and cool, but it's not. I don't think we have sufficient enough information to actually say that it is a good direction for your relationship, because most people grow through challenge and going through certain things together. But then again, might just be me. All in all, if you don't get married and you're one of the 1 in 4 people, then I just hope that you find contentment and you find happiness. And if you do want to be one of the people that get into a relationship and probably get married, I hope you do get there. But clearly the research is there, and it is very unfortunate, but hopefully we'll have some very uplifting research sometime soon. Either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, I have spoken about the Sophia and Bumpy story in part 1. I don't want to get too deep into it because I feel like repeating it probably won't do all that much for us, especially considering that I have so many more points to talk about and I may not have enough time. Like, I think I spoke about things a little bit too much, or I just spent a lot of time talking about things in part 1 that, considering that I have double the number of points in part 2, I'll definitely have to trim things down for the sake of time. Now, just to give a quick overview on everything, so the whole Sophia and Bumpy story is a story that was on the So This Is Love podcast, came out sometime around mid-December 2024, and it was a story of abuse and manipulation by one partner and how it affected someone, and it absolutely hurt this lady that is being referred to as Sophia because she was very mistreated, abused, and manipulated by her partner, who is referred to as Bumpy. Now, there are takeaways from it, and it is a 2.5 hour long podcast episode, which I cannot clip and insert bits of that podcast episode because I do not have 2.5 hours in my episode. My episodes are usually way shorter than that, just like 20 to 30 minutes ish. So I am going to give the takeaways that are there, and if you do want to listen to the entire episode, I have linked it in the description for you to click, and you should get the Spotify link to that particular episode. Now, with that said, I will continue after the 40-minute mark of that episode all the way till the end. There are a couple of things that I still picked up from that entire episode. Now, one of the ones that I picked up is the idea of poly relationships, and not necessarily that it's new information for me, but it's the fact that poly relationships can only exist if both parties are willing and comfortable with the entire idea. Now, by poly relationships, I'm referring to polyandry, I am referring to polygamy, I am referring to half open, I am referring to open relationships, I am referring to hot wifing, I am referring to cuckoldry. Like, whatever it is that you would classify as a situation or an arrangement that involves more than one party besides the two people that are in that relationship, engaging in some level of intimacy with either a partner or both partners in that relationship, I am throwing it under the poly manica, the polyamorous manica, if I can say it in full. Now, when it comes to polyamorous relationships or just poly relationships in general, I believe that if both parties aren't comfortable with it, then there's a very good chance that one person is going to feel shortchanged, or one person is just not going to enjoy it as much as the other. Now, people can argue about, who enjoys more here, who enjoys more there, who benefits more here and there, but at the end of the day, if the other party, and by other party I'm referring to one of the original two people that got into the relationship together, if the other party is not comfortable with the poly situation, then it is not going to be good for the both of you. It is not going to be advantageous for the both of you. Actually, normally when that happens, that's when the breakdown of the relationship usually tends to start. And for what it's worth, it's not like I am pro poly relationship. Like, I am not a particularly big fan of them. I'm a big believer in monogamy and, the wealth of possibilities that you can have if you're in a monogamous relationship and it's closed. But, then again, that's just me. If getting into a poly relationship is your thing, you go do you, and hopefully the partner that you have will be okay with it. But all in all, if you are going to engage in some version of a poly relationship, then usually both parties need to be willing and comfortable with it for it to actually work out. I don't think it'll last for very long, but for it to last as long as you'd probably want it to be, you probably should be both willing and comfortable so that it can happen. Now, with that said, the other thought that I got was any type of abuse that's accepted in a relationship never usually stops. Now, more often than not, we've heard certain people make certain statements that talk about habit in a certain sense, where they're like, for example, once a cheater, always a cheater. Now, while I can debate, the basis of that and whether it's entirely true or false, plus, live examples and everything, one thing that I do know for a fact is if you are willing to tolerate someone's behavior more than once, and it happens again and again, there's a very good chance that, especially after 2-3 times, if you've managed to tolerate it and there are no repercussions for the abuse or the mistreatment or the misgivings of that person, they will continue to do it. Because whether or not they feel remorse, whether or not they feel bad, the fact that you are willing to take it, or at least the fact that you're willing to compromise, the fact that you have not reacted to it, means that there's a certain level of compromise that you've had, and it kind of gives that person, I don't want to say it gives them permission, but it kind of puts them in that state where they basically have unwritten permission, even though you haven't given it willingly. And more often than not, you will hear people that will, for example, abuse their partners, whether it's physical abuse, whether it's emotional abuse, whether it's psychological abuse, or even sexual abuse. Those that will abuse their partners, say, for example, 2 times, will probably do it multiple other times. People usually talk about one time and they're like, oh, make sure you leave, which, while it is probably the most recommended by many people, I would probably say that it's not always the case. There are times when people will do some form of abuse once and they understand or they learn that it was a bad thing that they did, and they kind of work towards not doing that again. That does happen. But more often than not, if it's gonna happen 2 times, it's gonna happen every time. So if it happens more than once and it's accepted, it'll never stop happening. All right. Now, next thing that I picked up was, as a grown human being that is above the age of 18, so is technically an adult, at least by this part of the world, if something feels wrong, leave. It is entirely up to you to leave. It's better, hell, it's probably even easier to think about it when you're outside of that situation than when you're inside. Like, there are instances where people will encounter some form of abuse and they will choose to stay in that relationship even with that abuse, hoping that it doesn't happen again. And to be honest, for you to actually recognize how bad what it is that was done to you was, you sometimes need to take a step back. I usually tend to have some reservations about taking full advice from friends and everything, because sometimes, your friends could actually be trying to get you out of your relationship for their own personal reasons, not, for the benefit of you as the individual. But all in all, it's better for you to step out and look at not just what it is that your friends might tell you, but essentially what the relationship looks like from outside, so that you can get a much clearer view of where things are. Because when you're in the mix, when you're in the relationship, there's a lot that you won't see, because there's a lot that's happening around you that is not always in sight. There's some things that you will take. There's some things that will happen to you that you will take because you are trying to preserve the relationship. Especially for people that are very, very into whatever relationship they're in, or they're really in love with a person, there's a lot of BS that you might take because you're in the relationship and you're trying to keep the both of you together, which when you step out and you actually have a look at things from when you're outside looking in, or when you're a little bit further away. So for example, if you've taken a break, or if you've had some space with the person or from the person, you actually start to realize that what it is that they're doing is actually quite bad. Now, for example, with this particular babe referred to as Sophia, she took quite a bit of emotional abuse, she took quite a bit of sexual abuse, she took quite a bit of physical abuse. And she probably didn't think it was all that bad. And even when she recognized that it was bad, she was being told that it's not that bad by the wrong characters. And she'd end up sticking because she felt that maybe she is the problem, or maybe it's just something that she'll need to tough out. Yet in reality, for those of us that are hearing the story, because we're outside looking in, we can clearly see that there's a massive problem. So more often than not, I feel like if people could take a step back and have a look at whatever it is that they're actually going through in a relationship, they can much clearly see, if they feel like something is wrong, they can clearly see where the problem is and see how to resolve the issue, as opposed to just staying there and you continue going through something that is not good for you, that is not healthy, that could be toxic and could actually harm you in very, very serious ways. Now, with that said, on to the next point. Domestic violence in and of itself is loud, but it's actually a silent killer. And I know the statement itself sounds very contradictory, as you sort of just look at one half versus the other half. But let me explain it like this. People will talk about how bad domestic violence is, how if they encounter a situation of domestic violence that they would probably leave, or they should leave, and if you go through it, you should definitely leave. And while all that is fine and dandy, when you look at people who have gone through some version of domestic violence, a lot of them have stayed in those relationships and tried to cover up for their partner, or cover for whatever domestic violence has happened, and tried to act as though things are normal. So there's a lot of instances where there could be domestic violence, there could be physical abuse that's happening to a person in a relationship, and they will choose not to talk about it because the moment they talk about it, they know they will be told, leave this person immediately. They will be told that, you know what, you're done with this person. And both of those things mean the end of the relationship, which they have been trying to preserve, or they are trying to preserve, which they are holding so dear. And for the lot of them, they would not want to lose that. It's something that is of great value to them. You will hear people who've been in relationships for a long time because they really like the person, or because they've been with the person for such a long time. When they start encountering abuse, they continue staying in the relationship because they believe, oh, maybe it's a phase and it'll probably go, or maybe it was just a one-time thing, or maybe they've just been having these sorts of issues and, just give it some time and it'll be resolved. Yet the reality of it is, you could be going through some form of abuse, and I mentioned domestic violence, so I'll stick with that. You could be going through some version of domestic violence, and because you want to stay with this person, because you do not want to spell the end of your relationship, you would much rather choose to keep quiet and sit on it. And I think talking to your friends, being objective with each other, and being open about the fact that you do not deserve domestic violence in any way, shape, or form, I think is something that people should definitely tell each other. I think having good, healthy relationships with someone, and having someone that you can confide in about your relationship issues, is actually something that is very important for a lot of people in today's day and age, so that we can curb a lot of these instances of domestic violence that end up being repeated. There's recent stats on femicide in Kenya over, I think, the past year or so, which stated that 70%, or I think something close to 70% of the cases of femicide have been perpetrated by the lady's husband. And usually the next one after that is the boyfriend. And honestly, when you're in a position where you are seeing cases like this, you can clearly see domestic violence might be loud, and we can talk about it all the live long day about how bad it is, but at the end of the day, it's a very silent issue, and it's a very silent killer if you do not pay attention to it. If you look at it as a silent killer, and we encourage people to speak up, it is something that would be very, very important for us as people. Now, with that said, the next thing, which actually when you start getting towards the end of that episode, you start to pick up on, is validation is a very big thing for humans, and if you don't watch out, you could very easily end up suffering or losing out just trying to gain it, or just trying to get it from those that you value. Now, I know there's a lot of people that will talk about how they don't need validation, they're good, they wouldn't need validation from so and so, and by all means, that's probably true, but at the end of the day, I believe that us as humans, us as social beings, we want validation from at least the closest people that we love. It's what will give us the drive, the push to go and do what it is that we'd want to do. Validation has created billionaires, but it's also killed people. Validation has helped people move to the next stage, and it's not helped people at all. It's actually brought them down. Hell, it's brought families down. Validation has helped people buy Mercedes G-classes and Ferraris, but at the same time, it's had people blowing their entire salaries at the club. Like, validation is actually a very important thing for us as human beings, for us as people, individuals. And the thing with validation is, where it is that you lack validation can very easily be the precursor to where your insecurities lie. So for example, if you did not get validation from those that you loved, it is very easy for you to go and look for that validation from someone else that you would want the love from. You will find attachment issues as a result of that. And if you do not recognize that your insecurities are coming from that lack of validation, you very easily open yourself up to be used and abused by the wrong people in a lot of different scenarios, not even just romantic ones, just in general, because of that sort of insecurity. And so at the end of the day, while I can't say that, you need to go and get validation from healthy sources, because damn, what do those look like? And human beings change all the time. What I will say is that it's probably smart for you to recognize what your insecurities are or where your insecurities may lie, and get to the root cause, or at least why you seem to be lacking in validation, so that at least the next time you're engaging in some sort of relationship, whether romantic, whether interpersonal, whether intrapersonal, you understand that you have those insecurities and they can make you do certain things which can end up hurting you or helping you. And if you are aware of that, then you can probably avoid getting into some of the pitfalls as much as you probably would have if you weren't aware of what your insecurities are. And with that said, on to the next one, or at least on to the next thought, which is having conversations with older people about marriage and relationships is very, very important for a lot of us today. Now, we are very young people, or I believe that a vast majority of the people that listen to this podcast are particularly young individuals. And that can range anywhere from 18 years old to even mid to late 30s. Like hell, there are people that are 40 and they still refer to themselves as young. And if that's you, great, good, perfect, fine. Like at the end of the day, I believe that going to listen or having discussions with older people on relationships is very, very important. Particularly people who've been in relationships for decades can give you a lot of insight on what makes a good relationship and what doesn't make a good relationship. Now, like I've always said, all relationships are different, and as a result, the kind of advice that you get doesn't necessarily have to be the best advice or even particularly great advice. Like, there's some things that you'll be told by older people which might seem like they might be good pieces of advice, but just because they worked for them doesn't mean that it worked for you. But all in all, getting different perspectives and learning different things can help you become a much better partner in future. And I'll give a pretty good example. There's this couple that live in the same area as us guys, and they've been together for, if my math is right, probably around 58 years as of 2025. Depending on whatever time, the anniversary is. And honestly, like, being together for 58 years is crazy by anyone's standards. Like, I'm not even 58. Hell, I'm barely even half of 58 years old. So when I asked the man what one piece of advice in relation to relationships and marriage he could give is, dude straight up told me, share everything. Like, be honest about everything, share everything, don't hide. Like, be completely honest with your partner. And it sounds great, and I remember even questioning, and I was like, even like the money bits, and he was like, yeah, even the money, like even the accounting, the figures and everything, show everything to her and you will have a great marriage. And that sounds like great advice. Like, that actually sounds like absolutely amazing advice. And while I do recognize that it sounds like great advice, I also understand that there are some partners who may actually suffer if they choose to take this option. There are some people that are dating people that they know very well. If they were fully financially transparent with them, or if they were transparent with them on a financial level, that would spell their financial end. that would spell financial issues between the both of them. There are some women that are earning multiple times more than their partners, but they have to be meek and not show the extent of their financial wealth because it might bruise their partner's ego. There are some men who are afraid of showing how much it is they earn because they believe that their partner would not be particularly prudent in terms of the financial spending of the household. Like, there's a lot of people who probably won't benefit from this advice. Hell, it might probably even hurt them. But at the very same time, there are people that will do so well if they have this piece of advice and they actually apply it to their relationships. And that is why I'm saying getting multiple different perspectives from multiple different people that are older than you, that have been in relationships for much longer than you, in the 10, 20, 30 year range, would actually be very beneficial to you as an individual and as a young person. And last but not least, good relationships aren't about not fighting. They're about resolving conflict in a good and healthy way. Now, a lot of times people talk about how if you're fighting in your relationship a lot, then it means that the relationship isn't good, because good relationships, you guys are supposed to gel, you shouldn't fight, things should be great. And I personally think that that's a big stack of bull. Now, of course, yes, it should be more bliss than it is fighting. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that. But there are times when you guys might have issues in the relationship and you're fighting constantly. Now, does that mean that the relationship is bad or the relationship should end? Personally, I don't think so. But I believe the best indicator of a good relationship isn't you guys not fighting, it's how you guys resolve your conflicts. If you can resolve your conflicts in a good, healthy way, even though it means agreeing to disagree, then I think you guys are golden. If you can agree to disagree, that's fine. Like, at least you've agreed. Even though it's not on the same footing, at least you guys have agreed. If you can resolve your issues, if you can resolve your conflicts in a good, healthy way, I do think that your relationship does stand to benefit. And with all of the talking that I've done considering this one viral episode, let me come to this conclusion. And while it might not seem like the most surefire way, or it might seem particularly weird with the way that I usually talk about relationships, I still want to conclude by saying that you can feel a good relationship. Like, you can actually feel when a relationship is good, and you can also feel when a relationship isn't good. Don't ignore your feelings. Do not ignore your feelings. If you feel like the relationship is good, then perfect. If you do not feel like the relationship is good, then I believe that at the very least, you should at least check with your partner and see if things are okay. But if deep down you know that things are not okay, it is up to you to speak up, because in as much as other people outside of the relationship can say one thing or the other, at the end of the day, the control of the relationship is always between the people that are in that relationship. Although, then again, maybe I don't know too much because I haven't been in that many relationships or for that long. And maybe I might be wrong about all of this shit. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.